Hey there, Heather, ho there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to another Stone Cold Hockey tournament. We are doing the 1975 tournament now, 74-75. So 18 teams were in this 1975 season. So what they did was we have a round of 16 quarters, semis, and final. Now the preliminary round will be best of 3. The last 16 will be best of 5, and then everything else is best of 7. So 4 teams got randomly selected: Rangers, Vancouver, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, to be in preliminary rounds, which means the other 14 teams, even those expansion Scouts and Capitals, are going to be in the tournament. So round 1 starts Vancouver Rangers, and the Rangers win in overtime as Vermeulen beats Gary Suitcase Smith. Vancouver goals by Don Lever, Rod Zillebauer, Ab DeMarco, and Don Lever again. Rangers goals by Jean Rattel, Rick Middleton, Jean Rattel, Rod Gilbert, and then in overtime by Rattel getting the hat trick, assisted by Ron Harris. So Rattel with a hat trick. Game 2 for LA at Los Angeles. Atlanta wins in overtime as Danny Bouchard beats Gary Edwards. LA scored Yuo winning, the Finnish superstar, from Frank St. Marsillo. Atlanta got a goal by Eric Vale from Rayo Como and Tom Lasiak. And then in overtime at 5:18 on a power play, when Sheldon Kitchener got penalized for roughing Eric Vale, his second from Harvey and Graves. Game 2 saw LA win 3-0 to force a Game 3 back in Atlanta. Rogie Vachon in net against Phil Meyer. Former members of the 71 Habs lost their final to New York. Tommy Williams, Bob Berry, and Butch Goring. Yes, Butch Goring, not Butch Goring, scored for the Kings. Rangers Vancouver Game 2 sees the Canucks win 3-2 on home turf as Smith beat Jackman. Vancouver was up 3-0. Bob Murray, Dennis Fairvergard, and Paulin Boudreau scoring for the Canucks. Rod Gilbert scored twice for the Rangers, but not enough. So both preliminary rounds have to go to Game 3, and in Game 3, the Rangers win 5-2. Vermeulen beat Suitcase. Vancouver, Bordelot, and Leon Rossroth scored, but the Rangers scored 5 goals. Steve Vickers, Bill Fairbairn, Walt Kachuk, Kitchener, and Jean Rattel were the heroes for the Rangers. And they will be joined by the Flames, who won in overtime. Phil Meyer beats Rogie Vachon. Atlanta had 2-0 lead. Noel Price and Brian Hextall, but the Kings scored winning and Bob Berry. But in overtime, Brian Hextall, great pass from Harvey Leiter. We'll move on to the round of 16, best of 5. So New York will move forward and will play Toronto, and Atlanta will face Montreal. So the first matchup, St. Louis. So it's St. Louis versus Pittsburgh, Philly versus the Islanders, Detroit, Kansas City, Montreal, Atlanta, Minnesota, Boston, Toronto, New York, Chicago, California, and Buffalo, Washington. So Game 1 of St. Louis Pittsburgh sees the Blues win 4-2 as John Davidson, future Ranger goalie, beat Michel Place. Pittsburgh goals by Vic Hadfield, who left the Rangers. Wow. And Chuck Arneson. St. Louis goals by Bob Hess, Keith Richardson, I guess, Bill Collins, and Gary Ungar. Mr. Ironman. Philly Islanders Game 1 saw the Islanders go to Philly and win 4-1 as Chico Resch beats Brady Perron. Big win for the Islanders. Denny Potvin scoring twice. Bob McMillan and J.P. Parise scoring the other goals. Don Selesky, the only Flyer to put one past Resch. Wow. Detroit beat Kansas City 5-4. It was close. Jim Rutherford beats Peter McDuff. Detroit was up 3-0. Phil Roberto, Marcel Dion. Yeah, this was before he was a King. And I would say Michel Bergeron. Maybe it is Michel Bergeron. But anyway, Kansas City tied it. Guy Charron, Wilf Paymon, and Eddie Gilbert scoring. But Detroit scored 2. Matt Corney and Nick Libet. Wilf Paymon, his second goal for the Chiefs. Game 1, Montreal-Atlanta. Montreal wins 5-2 as Bunny LaRock was in net against Phil Meyer, former Hab. Atlanta goes by Kirk Bennett and Jerry Meehan. But Montreal goes by Murray Wilson, Doug Ricebrill, Kitchener, Pierre Bouchard, Yvon Cournoyer, and Serge Savard. Minnesota-Boston, Game 1 saw Boston win in overtime over Minnesota as Ken Broderick and Pete LaPrust. Broderick, surprisingly, in net. This was before Cheever. Well, Cheevers was still in the WHA. Broderick beats Lil Presty. Ron Graham and Terry O'Reilly in regulation for Boston. Lou Nanny, pair of goals for the Stars. But then Don Marcotte in overtime from Al Sims and Johnny Busick. Made it 3-2 Boston. Leafs beat the Rangers 4-2 as Dunk Wilson for the Leafs took on Gilles Vermeer. Big win for the Leafs. Rangers 2 goals. Derek Sanderson when he was a Ranger and Jean Rattel, his fifth. Dave Keon scored. Earl Thompson with 2 goals and Inge Harnestrom scored. Chicago, California. Chicago winning 6-2. Espo beats Gary the Snake Simmons. California goals by Joey Johnston and Charlie Simmer before he was a King. Blackhawks goals Pitt Martin, Doug Jarrett, Dennis Hall, Jerry Mulvey, and Jim Pappen. Bobby Hall was in the WHA, by the way. Buffalo, Washington. Buffalo wins 13-0. Well, that was not even close. Ron Lowe stayed in net for all 13 goals. Gary Bromley was in net for Buffalo. Richard Martin with a hat trick. Joe Perreault, Fred Stanfield, and Rene Robert all scored 2 goals. So that was 9 goals. Don Luce, Kitchener, Brian Spencer, Joe Perreault, and Jim Lawrence, Kitchener, with the singlets. Game 2, Flyers beat the Isles 2-0. Perrant, normalcy against Billy Smith. Reggie Leach and Don Selesky with the goals. Man, Selesky. Detroit beat Kansas City 6-2 this time. Rutherford beats McDuff. Kansas City got goals by Robbie Burns and Guy Charon. Detroit goals by Mickey Redmond, Marcel Dion, Bob Lucky, Mickey Redmond again, Danny Grant, and Corny. Man, Corny looking decent. Game 2, Montreal, Atlanta. So Montreal shut out Atlanta 5-0. Bunny LaRock was still in net against Dan Bouchard. And no, 74-75 was not the year Ken Dryden held out and lost a year. That was 73-74. So Montreal goes Guy Lafleur, Yvonne Lambert, Bob Gainey, and Mario Tremblay. Boo, that guy. Fuck that guy. Minnesota, Boston. Boston won 4-3 as Gilles Gilbert beat Cesar Menego. Minnesota goals by Murray Oliver, former Bruin, Jack Flesh, and Bill Dunlop. Boston goals by Andre Savard, Bobby Orr, Greg Shepard, and Donnie Marcotte. No, Cherry didn't coach that team. 75 team. Leafs win 9-2 in Game 2. Dunk Wilson was in net for the Rangers against Doug Favell. Rangers, Rod Gilbert, and Greg Pullis were the only guys to score on the Leafs. 9 goals for the Leafs. Bill Flett, Tiger Williams, Norm Allman, Daryl Sittler, Bill Flett again, Norm Allman again, Brian Glennie, Ian Turnbull, and then Sittler, my idol. Game 2. Sees Chicago win 5-1 as Espo beats Gary Simmons. King scored for Cali, but they held the lead for only 14 minutes. Dale Talon, Jim Pappen, Cliff Corral, Jim Pappen again, and then Dennis Hall scored for the Blackhawks. And St. Louis won Game 2 in overtime over Pittsburgh. Yves Boulanger beats Gary Innes. St. Louis goals in regulation, Wayne Merrick, Gary Unger, and Pierre Plante. Pittsburgh goals by Vic Hadfield, Lowell McDonald, and Pierre LaRouche. But after Paradise took a bad penalty and went to Paradise, Wayne Merrick, his second of the night, the overtime winner from Bob Gassoff and Gary Unger. And Buffalo beat Washington 4-1 this time as Bromley beats Ron Lowe. Mike Marson scored. They almost got shut out 2 straight games. They were 8 seconds away from that. Gilles Perreault, Rene Robert, Don Luce, Kitchener, and Gilles Perreault for Buffalo. Anyway, we have every series except for Philly Islanders could end in a best-of-5 sweep. Does Detroit Kansas City do it? Yes, they do. But it was only 3-1. Rutherford beat McDuff. Kansas City did score Simon Nole, but Bergeron scored, and then Danny Grant and Corny. Corny, man. That guy's not good. So Detroit will make the quarterfinals. Montreal will make the quarterfinals. They beat Atlanta. Although it was 3-2. Bunny LaRock beat Dan Bouchard. Atlanta goes by Tom Lysiak and Kirk Bennett. Montreal goes by Mario Tremblay, Yvonne Lambert, and Jacques Lemaire. Game 3 for Minnesota-Boston saw Minnesota win in overtime, so they are still around. Pete Lopresti in net against Gilles Gilbert. Crazy game. Minnesota was up 4-2 on goals by Nick Radden, Dean Telefus, Nick Radden, and then Dennis O'Brien. Boston goes by Johnny Busick, 2, and then they put 3 straight to Abe Forbes, Bobby Orr, and Andre Savard, but Doug Rumbro from Minnesota tied it overtime after Schmaltz got in trouble for tripping. Bill Goldsworthy, the man from Waterloo, Ontario, from Dennis Hexton, Blake Dunlop. Rangers win 5-4 on home turf, so they avoid the sweep as Gilles Ramoon beat Gordon McRae. Ranger goals by Pete Stamkowski, former leave, Gilles Morat, Rod Gilbert, Bill Filburn, and Joey Butler. Butler did it. Leafs, Daryl Sittler, Earl Thompson, and then Sittler. So Sittler and Thompson both with a pair of goals in that game. California somehow beat Chicago at home, and 10-2. Simmons beats Espo. Cliff Coral and Pitt Martin scoring, but California put up 10 goals. Stan Weir, Bill Stewart, Herkulski, King, Stan Weir again, Mott, Al McAdam, Jim Nielsen, Freddie Spring, and Ron Houston. California somehow put up 10 goals. Game 3 sees Washington win. Are you serious? 5-3 as Belhumeur beat Bromley. Buffalo goals by Gilbert Perreault, Richard Martin, Rene Robert, the French connection, all with the hat with a goal. Mike Marston, Jim Hukriek, Tommy Williams, and then Tommy Williams, the American hero, was the guy who put the empty netter and forced game 4. Pittsburgh has forced another game. They win 5-1. Innes beats John Davidson. Pierre Plante for St. Louis scored, but Pittsburgh got goals by Ron Schock, Ron Stackhouse, Schock again, Chuck Arneson, and Pierre Larouche. Islanders beat the Flyers 5-4 in overtime. Smith beat Parent. Philly goals by Rick McLeish, Bobby Clark, Bill Clement, and Tom Blade in regulation. Islander goals by Billy McMillan, Ron Stewart, Jerry Horwat, and Billy Harris. But at 21 seconds, Lauren Henny from Dave Lewis scored, and the Islanders win this game. So all the game 3s are done. Game 4 of Minnesota-Boston, and Boston won 5-3. Russ Brooks took on Fern Rivard and did his job. Boston goals by Carl Fande, Bobby Orr, Johnny Busick, Don Marcotte, and Espo. Minnesota goals by Noel Gradden, Dave Martineau, and Murray Oliver. So Boston's in with Detroit and Montreal to the quarterfinals. Leafs win in overtime. They are going to quarterfinals. Buffalo beat Vermeer. Toronto was up 3-1. Goals by Igor Hammerstrom, 2 of them, and Normie Allman. Ranger goals by Pete Stankowski, Bill Fairburn, and Steve Vickers. But in overtime at 150, Cowboy Flat from Lauren Moffat and Jim McKinney. And the Leafs beat the Rangers 4-3. I know. Shut up, Cutter coming. Chicago, California. Well, Chicago won 3-2. And Mike Pfizer was in net for Chicago against Gilles Meloche. Gilles Gagnon, Pitt Martin, and Dennis Hall for Chicago. Charlie Simmer and Larry Pate for California. Buffalo crushed Washington 7-1. Bromley beats Lowe. It was close, 2-1. Rick Dudley, Brian Spencer for Buffalo, Stan Gilbertson for Washington. But then that third period, Peter McNabb, Brian Spencer again, Jim Lawrence, Kitchener, Rene Robert, and Gilbert Perreault. Pittsburgh wins and forces Game 5 in St. Louis 5-4 in overtime. Michel Plas beats Eddie Johnston. Pittsburgh was up 4-0. Goals by natural hat trick by Jean Provo and then Chuck Arneson. But St. Louis scored 4 straight goals. Danny Dupree, Barrison with a pair of goals, and Wayne Merrick. But after Wilson went in the box, Rick Kehoe scored from Barry Wilkins, and the Steelers forced Game 5. And the last Game 4, Philly wins 3-1 to force a Game 5. Perron beats Chico. Danny Potvin did score for the others, but Gary Dornhofer, Moose Dupont, and Reggie Leach were the heroes for the Flyers. So we have 2 Game 5s. Does Pittsburgh come back from a 2-0 hole? The answer is yes, they do. Pittsburgh was down 2-0 to the Blues, and now they go to the quarterfinals. Innis beats Belanger. St. Louis goes by Doug Pilarsi, Chuck Leafley, Gary Younger, and Bill Collins. By Pittsburgh goes Pierre LaRouche, Chuck Arneson, Lowell McDonald, Jean Prodeveau. The hero, Pittsburgh wins. And the last game 5 sees the Flyers win. Perron beat Smith. The Oilers almost did it. The Oilers were up 2-0. Bob Nystrom scored 2 goals, but in the third period, Bill Barber, Kitchener, and Bobby Clark scored. In overtime, after Nystrom and John Potvin were in the box, Rick McLeish on the 5-on-3 scored from Dornhofer and DuPont. And the Flyers will move to the quarterfinals. Quarterfinals will see Boston, Toronto, Montreal, Pittsburgh, Philly, Buffalo, and Detroit, Chicago. So two of the semifinals will be all original 6. Wow. Game 1, Boston beats Toronto 6-5. Gilbert beat Gordon McRae. Lots of goals. The Leafs were up 5-3. Earl Thompson, Dave Keon, Boris Solming, Blaine Stoughton. Boston goes by Bobby Orr, Bobby Schmaltz, Johnny Busick, Phil Esposito, and Terry O'Reilly. But in overtime, Wayne Cashman from Langdon and Nowak. Nova names with the assists. Montreal beat Pittsburgh 6-2 as Bunny LaRocque beat Michel Place. Pittsburgh goals by Lowell McDonald and Chuck Arneson. Montreal goes by Murray Wilson, Guy Lapointe, Larry Robinson, Kitchener. Guy Lapointe, Doug Riseborough, Kitchener, and Guy Lafleur. Flyers beat the Sabres 4-2. Perron beats Bromley. Buffalo goes by Shel Perreault, his son, Jim Schoenfeld. Have another donut! Flyer goes by Bill Barber with 2. Kitchener. Bill Clement. Yeah, that guy. And Gary Dornhofer. And Detroit-Chicago game 1 saw Chicago crush Detroit in the fine powder 8-3 as Mike Weiser beats Jim Rutherford. Detroit goes by, that's gotta be, is that Michel Bergeron? I don't know. Danny Grant and Marcel Dion. Yeah, Dion. Chicago, 8 goals. Phil Russell, Cliff Coral, Darcy Rhoda, Grant Mulvey, Gaston Gagnon, Jody Marks, Sam Nikita, and Gagnon again. I have to know. Michel Bergeron. Yep, I was right. Anyway, game 2, Montreal-Pittsburgh. They start off. And Montreal wins 7-1. Dryden in net this time against Innis. Battleship Kelly scored for Pittsburgh, but Montreal scored 7. Yvon Lambert, Guy Lafleur, Steve Shutt, Guy Lapointe, Yvon Lambert, Guy Lapointe. So, Lambert, Lapointe, and Lafleur had 2 goals. Philly-Buffalo, game 2, saw Flyers in overtime. Perron beats Bromley. Philly goals Rick McLeish and Ed Van Impen regulation. Buffalo, Lee Vogelin Sr. and Gilbert Perreault tied it. But on the power play, thanks to Vogelin's tripping call, Rick McLeish scored in overtime from Clark and Dornhofer. And the last game 2 saw Detroit win 6-2 over Chicago. Jim Rutherford beats Espo. Chicago got goals by Cliff Coral and Pete Martin, but that was not to be. It's Phil Roberto, Danny Grant, Marcel Dion, Nick Libet, Danny Grant, and Phil Roberto with the goals. Game 3. Oh, sorry. That wasn't the end of game 2's. Boston beat Toronto 4-3 to go up 2-0 as Ken Broderick in net against Doug Favell. Toronto goes by Earl Thompson and Dave Keon and Ronnie Ellis. But Boston goals by Bobby Orr, Greg Shepard, Wayne Cashman, and Taz O'Reilly. Philly-Buffalo leads off game 3s, and Buffalo wins 4-2, so they're doing something. Bromley beats Perron. Philly goals by Terry Crisp and Gary Dornhofer. Buffalo goals by Rich Martin, Rene Robert, Danny Gare, and Craig Ramsey. Detroit-Chicago game 3. See Chicago take the series back 4-1. Espo beats Rutherford. Sean Hamel scored for the Wings. Hawks, Grant Mulvey, Dick Redmond, Gagnon, and Daigle. Not Alex Daigle. That has to be a different Daigle. But anyway, Chicago won 4-1. Game 3 for Boston-Toronto sees the Bruins win 5-4. They're now up 3-0. Ross Brooks beats Dunk Wilson. In regulation, Bobby Orr, Don Marcotte, Greg Shepard, and Orr scoring. Toronto, George Ferguson, Ron Ellis, Blaine Stoughton, and Cowboy Flett. 1, 2, 3, 4. But in overtime, thanks to Tiger Williams being in trouble for interference. Don Marcotte scored in overtime from Johnny Buzik and Dallas Smith. Montreal-Pittsburgh Game 3 sees Montreal go to Pittsburgh and win 7-3 as Dryden beats Plus. Vic Hadfield, Sean Protoville getting goals, but Montreal did their job. Steve Shutt, Guy Lafleur, Yvan Cournoyer, Mario Tremblay, Guy Lafleur, Pete Mahovlich. So Lafleur with the hat trick. Game 4's time. And Chicago beat Detroit 3-2, so they're up with one more win. Espel beats Rutherford. Blackhawk goals by Pitt Martin with 2 and Greg Mulvey. Detroit goals by Marcel Dion, both of them. Boston-Toronto. Toronto stays around. 9-4. Favel beats Gilles Gilbert. Boston had, 2-0. Carol Vanney and Greg Shepard, but Toronto scored 6 straight goals. Ingrid Hammerstrom, Blaine Stoughton, Tiger Williams, Boris Solomon, Tiger Williams, Bill Flett. Boston, Bobby Schmaltz and Dave Forbes scored. George Ferguson, Earl Thompson, and Tiger Williams. So we're not done yet. Montreal-Pittsburgh, we're also not done. Pittsburgh wins 7-2 as Bunny LaRocque lost to Michel Plaz. Big win for Pittsburgh. Murray Wilson and Steve Shutt scored from Montreal, but Pittsburgh scored. Lowell McDonald, Vic Hadfield, Lowell McDonald, E-I-E-I-O, Chuck Arneson, Sean Protoville, and then Arneson. So Pittsburgh wins 7-2. And Buffalo wins 3-0. They will split the first 4 games. Bromley with the hat trick the shutout over Perron. Rick Martin with 2, and Gilles Perreault scored. So Boston trying to beat Toronto in 5. They do. On home turf, 5-3. Broderick beats Pierre Hamel. Boston goals by Vanney, Busick, Schmaltz, and Espo. Leaf goals by Sittler, Cowboy Flett, and Earl Thompson. Weren't enough, and the Bruins will move on to the semis. Pittsburgh shocks Montreal in overtime. Innes beats LaRocque. Pittsburgh was up 4-1. Chuck Arneson, Pete Laframboise, Raspberry, Lowell McDonald, and Logan Morrison scoring for Pittsburgh. But Montreal, Guy Lafleur, but then the comeback was complete. You're going to find Cournoyer, Pete Mahovlich, and that damn guy, Mario Tremblay. But in overtime, Chuck Arneson, his 9th from Kelly and LaRouche. And Pittsburgh's forced to at least a Game 6. Philly wins Game 5 against Buffalo. Perron beats Jerry J. Jardin. Rene Robert was the only guy to score for Buffalo. Reggie Leach, Bill Clement, Rick McLeish, and Bill Clement for the Flyers. And Blackhawks beat the Red Wings 4-3. Espel beats Rutherford, so Chicago's going to the semifinals. JP Portillo, Dick Redmond, Jim Pappen, and Cliff Coral scoring for Chicago. Detroit goals by Bob Lockheed, Bill Roberto, and Walt McKechnie. So 2 series are tied. 2 series are done. Boston and Chicago. Will Montreal go to the semis? The answer is they will. In overtime, though. As Dryden beats Innes, Montreal had the lead 3 times. Pete Mahovlich, Jimmy Roberts, and Guy Lafleur. But Pittsburgh tied it up. Peter LaRouche, Vic Hadfield, and Sean Protoville. But in overtime, thanks to Colin Campbell's slashing call, Yvan Lambert, his 5th from point 2. And Montreal will go to the semis. And finally, Buffalo beats Philly 5-1 in Game 6. Jerry Desjardins beats Perron. Big win for Buffalo. Reggie Leach did score his 4th. Don Luce, Kitchener, his 3rd. Gilbert Perreault, Rene Robert, Gilbert Perreault, and Rene Robert. So 5-1, going to Game 7. And Buffalo wins 4-2. So Buffalo takes down Philly in 7. Bromley beats Perron. Bobby Clark and Oris Kindrachek for the Flyers. Buffalo, Rick Dudley, Don Luce, Kitchener, Craig Ramsey, and Rene Robert. So it's 4-2. So we are going to the semifinals. It is an all-original 6. Boston, Chicago, Montreal, and Buffalo will go toe-to-toe for the other semifinal spot. Just a summary, Rene Robert and Gilbert Perreault both have 11 goals. Guy Lafleur has 10. So Buffalo and Montreal are going to be It's going to be huge between Buffalo and Montreal. You got the top 3 goal scorers. Points wise, Rene Robert, Charles Pro with 18. Don Luce has 16. So that's good. Bromley is a good goalie. Larocque could also be a good goalie too, but you know, it is what it is. So let's head to the preliminary round was Rangers and Atlanta, but they didn't move it. Okay, so these guys have been around since the final 16. Boston, Chicago, game 1. Series Boston win 5-4. Ken Broderick beats Phil Esposito. Tony Esposito, what am I thinking? Boston goes by Wayne Cashman, Dave Hines, I guess that's his name. Andre Savard, Greg Shepard, and Bobby Orr. Chicago goes by Dale Talon, Cliff Coral, Jim Pappen, and Dennis Hall. Meanwhile, Montreal crushed Buffalo 9-1. Dryden beats Bromley. Only Buffalo goes by Danny Gare, his second. But Montreal 9 goals. Steve Shutt, Murray Wilson, Steve Shutt, Seth Savard, Murray Wilson, Guy Lafleur, Murray Wilson with the hat trick, and Pointu. So Murray Wilson, good for him. Game 2 sees Buffalo overtime heroics. Crozier was in net against Dryden. Buffalo was up 2-0. Rene Robert and Danny Gare scored. But Montreal tied it up. Steve Shutt and .2. But in overtime, 14 minutes of overtime, Jim Lorenz, Kitchener from Don Luce. Kitchener as well. The Kitchener connection. Game 2 for Boston Chicago saw Boston win in overtime. Broderick still in net against Espo. Bobby Orr, Don Marcotte were the goal scorers. Cliff Coral, Ivan Boldrev tied it up. But in overtime, 2 minutes, Bobby Schmaltz from Bobby Orr and Johnny Busick. Game 3s. So Boston beat Chicago 4-0. They're up 3-0. Gilles Jabert took care of business with the shutout over Phil. I keep saying Phil Esposito. Why? Well, Espo did score on his brother. Carol Fowden, Wayne Cashman, and Terry O'Reilly were the other guys. So Boston is now 1 win away from going to the finals. Buffalo beats Montreal 4-1. Bromley beats Dryden. Bob Gainey scored for Montreal. He usually doesn't. But Rene Robert, Danny Gare, Don Luce, Kitchener, and Ricky Martin scoring for Buffalo. Can Buffalo go up 3-1? The answer is yes, they will. As Crozier beats Bunny Larocque. Montreal 2 goals. Serge Savard and Mario Trny. But Jim Lorenz, Kitchener, Peter McNabb, and Bill Haight scoring for Buffalo. So Buffalo's up 3-1. Montreal could, for the first time in the tournament's history, not get to the final. But remember, it's the finalists, and I think I know. Well, Montreal. I'm going to give Montreal the benefit of doubt and give them 3rd place in 75 because they lost the semifinal. Well, actually, it's not over. What am I thinking? Anyway, it's over for Chicago. Boston wins 4-3 in overtime. Ross Brooks beats Tony Esposito. Boston sweeps through the Blackhawks. Big Bad Bruins. Espo with 2 goals in regulation and Bobby Orr with the other. Jim Pappen, Marks, and Pitt Martin scoring for Chicago. But in overtime at 6-15, Busick, the Chief from Phil Esposito. So Boston's going to the semifinals. And is it going to be Buffalo? No, it won't. Montreal wins 4-3 on home ice. Bunny Larocque beats Roger Crozier. Montreal goes by Pete Mahovlich, Bob Gainey, Guy Lafleur, and Jacques Lemaire. Buffalo goes by Peter McNabb, Rick Martin, and Rick Martin again. Game 6 sees Buffalo win 6-3. Bromley beats Dryden. Montreal will clinch 3rd place, though. That's not bad. They'll take a 3rd place because of them fighting. Montreal goes by Steve Shutt, Henri Richard. Finally, where the heck were you in goal scoring? And Steve Shutt saved. Buffalo goes by Rick Martin, his 11th. Don Luce, Kitchener, his 6th. Jim Lorenz, Kitchener, his 5th. Rick Martin, his 12th. Then Dudley, his 3rd. And Rene Robert, his 14th. So a pair of Kitchener Rangers, Lorenz and Luce, are helping the Sabres out. Let's look at Buffalo. Road to the final. Bromley 8-4. Crozier 2-1. Desjardins 1-1. Buffalo in the best of 5 round of 16 took care of Washington 4. Had to fight Philly off. Philly was up 3-2, I think, in that series against Buffalo. And then Buffalo took care of Montreal in 6. Rene Robert, 27 points. Earl Perreault, 23. Don Luce, the Kitchener boy, 21. Jim Lorenz has 12. Leif Vogelin has 1 point, and that's a goal. Alongside Bill Haight and Jim Schonfeld, only 1 goal. Rene Rivera's put 14 on the net. Rick Martin 12, Gilbert Pro 11. I've had to say Kitchener 11 times for Buffalo highlights. And Boston, Jules Gilbert is 3-2. But Broderick and Brooks are 8-0 combined. It's weird how Gilbert is the only one to lose a game. And then there's like, we're not letting you, it's like, we're not letting you win, Gilbert. Anyway, Boston took care of Minnesota in 4 in the round of 16. Easily took care of Toronto in 5 in the quarters, and then took care of Chicago in 4. So Boston looks like the more rested team. Bobby Orr with 25 points, Johnny Buzik with 18, Esposito and Marcotte both with 14. 10 goals by Bobby Orr. He's looking good. Marcotte 7, Esposito 6. Dave Hines and Rod Graham. That's who he is. Daryl Ederson and Steve Langdon. Dave Hines with points. And they're not really known for being players that you want to know about. So I'll just show you the bracket. And all that. Alright, down to the finals. Game 1. Buffalo wins 5-3 as Bromley beats Gilbert. Boston goes by Bobby Orr, John Buzik, and then Orr again. Buffalo goes by Jerry Korab, Rick Martin, Rene Robert. Rick Martin with a hat trick. He's now at 15. Game 2 sees Buffalo wins again, 6-2. Bromley beats Gilbert. Boston goals by Phil Esposito with both of them. Buffalo goals, Rick Martin has 16th. Korab, Jim Lorenz, Kitchener. Rene Robert is 16th. Rick Dudley and Brian Spencer. 6-2. Game 3 sees Buffalo go into Boston. Crozier beats Gilbert. Buffalo looks like they're going to sweep and go on to be the 75 champs. At least Boston will take second. Man, Boston was dominating. Boston goal by Esposito, but Buffalo goes Craig Ramsey, Gilles Perreault, Jim Lorenz, Kitchener, Fred Stanfield, and Craig Ramsey. Does Buffalo sweep? The answer is yes, they do. 5-2. As Crozier beats Broderick and finally hangs a loss on Broderick and Brooks. They were desperate, and Buffalo makes them pay for it. So Buffalo are the 1975 tournament champions. They are good. 2 goals by Boston, Dallas Smith and Phil Esposito, but goals by Craig Ramsey, Don Luce, Kitchener, Rick Martin, Jim Lorenz, Kitchener, and Don Luce, Kitchener. So 3 of the 5 Buffalo goals were scored by former Kitchener Rangers, Don Luce and Jim Lorenz. So yeah, so Buffalo's got the momentum and a 1 seed, which is pretty good. So yeah, so Buffalo swept through. They had a tough time. Philly actually almost got them. Right? Philly was up 2-0 and 3-2 on them. Like, every home team won, but then Buffalo won Game 7 on the road. That was the tough one. And then the semis, Montreal gave them a bit of a scare. But they pulled through and put a series sweep on Boston. So that's it. Buffalo are your champions. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.